The soft hum of muffled conversations, the rhythmic sound of hurried footsteps, and the occasional announcement of departing flights filled the luxurious Silver City International Airport. Large glass windows offered an impeccable view of the runways, where planes took off at regular intervals, as if part of a meticulously choreographed dance. The environment was pristine, with designer store displays showcasing gleaming jewelry and Italian leather bags, while gourmet cafes lured travelers with. Amidst this scene of luxury, Jack Morgan walked with his black leather suitcase, moving with precision through the other passengers. He wore a flawless, tailored suit, reflecting his status as one of the most powerful men in the tech industry. His face maintained a firm and unshakable expression, traits he carried as if they were his trademark. At 45, Jack was the epitome of success. A billionaire who had built his empire with cold determination, brushing aside any obstacles in his path. To most people, Jack's life seemed like the pinnacle of achievement. Private jets, lavish properties around the world, complete control over his destiny. Yet, as he moved through the airport, something inside him felt out of place, like a sour note in an otherwise perfect symphony. He had just returned from a business trip in Europe, one of the dozens he had taken that year. The deal he'd closed with masterful skill was yet another milestone in his career. But the thrill of victory wasn't the same. Something was off. With every step, the gleaming storefronts and the sophisticated atmosphere seemed to mirror his own life. A shining surface, but hollow. Jack knew it, but he had learned to ignore these moments of introspection. 10 years ago, he had made his choice, a sacrifice many businessmen make, abandoning any emotional ties that might hinder their pursuit of success. At the time, he believed it was necessary. He had walked away from Sarah Collins, the woman he had loved, to fully dedicate himself to his empire. They had married young. Sarah was sweet, intelligent, and full of dreams of her own. But Jack found himself drifting further away, consumed by the idea that the success he sought couldn't coexist with a personal life that, in his view, would only hold him back. He left without looking back, leaving Sarah with a short, cold letter explaining that he needed something bigger than what a conventional marriage could offer. In the first few years after the breakup, he convinced himself he had made the right decision. His name began appearing on lists of the most influential people, and headlines hailed him as a living legend in the tech sector. But no matter how much money and power flowed in, the satisfaction never came fully. Now, here in the heart of a luxury airport, the symbol of everything he had achieved, Jack felt a growing unease. His thoughts were an unbroken stream of meetings, projects, numbers. But suddenly, amidst all of that, Sarah's name echoed in his mind. Something inside him, long buried, was beginning to stir. It wasn't just longing. It was an emptiness he no longer knew how to fill. He hurried towards the boarding area, trying to push those feelings aside. The day was packed, and Jack wanted to stay focused on his schedule. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop the unsettling emotions from creeping into his mind, like a shadow following him uninvited. Jack Morgan's life had been a succession of triumphs, but also of loneliness. Since leaving Sarah, he had never again been in a meaningful relationship. He had no real friends. His circle was made up of executives, lawyers, and businessmen, all too busy for any genuine connection. For Jack, this was an advantage. The coldness protected him. But the more victories he amassed, the less relevant they seemed. The airport, a place of constant transit and fleeting encounters, was the perfect setting for someone like him. Always on the move, but without roots. And deep down, he knew he was constantly running from something that neither money nor power could fix. He paused in front of one of the large windows, watching a plane take off into the gray Silver City sky. The heavy clouds seemed to hover over him, almost symbolically. Was all of this worth it? The question he never dared to ask echoed in his mind. He shook his head, dismissing the thought, but the doubts clung to him like a fog around his consciousness. Jack resumed his walk towards the boarding gate. He knew that soon he would be in yet another meeting, sealing another billion-dollar deal, but for the first time in years, the feeling of victory didn't fill him. Something bigger seemed just out of reach, something he had abandoned long ago, and it was beginning to weigh on him like the burden of a life that, though successful, could have been different. As he passed a group of passengers seated in the waiting area, something caught his attention. It was only for a moment, but enough to make his heart race. Seated there, with her back to him, was a woman he would recognize anywhere. Sarah. Jack stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on that familiar figure. The woman he had left behind a decade ago was there, like a vision from the past. And beside her, A boy of about 9 years old was playing with a small toy airplane. The world around Jack Morgan seemed to come to a halt. What could have been an insignificant moment for anyone else had unleashed a storm in his mind. He was on his way to the boarding gate, focused on yet another business trip, but something stopped him in his tracks. His eyes were fixed on a woman sitting a few meters ahead of him, Sarah Collins. She looked almost the same, despite a decade having passed since Jack last saw her. Her hair, now shorter, moved gently with the air conditioning, and her posture radiated a confidence and peace that Jack never expected to see. But it wasn't just Sarah that kept him frozen in place. Beside her was a boy, about 9 years old, with bright, curious eyes. He was happily playing with a toy airplane, unaware of the man standing on the other side of the terminal. Jack blinked a few times, as if trying to confirm that what he was seeing was real. That boy, something about him felt disturbingly familiar. Jack tried to look away, to shake off the feeling of déjà vu, but his mind was already making connection. The boy, with his unmistakable features, couldn't be... No, that was impossible. Jack had left Sarah 10 years ago. He clearly remembered how he had walked out of her life, leaving everything behind in pursuit of success. There was no way she could have been pregnant and raised a child without him knowing. Or could she? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. This can't be real, he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself that he was being misled by coincidences. And even if it were true, he wasn't ready to deal with this possibility. There, in the middle of the airport, surrounded by strangers and enveloped in the impersonal luxury of the terminal, Jack felt the weight of his past decisions starting to stir within his chest. As he watched Sarah gently stroke the boy's hair, Jack felt a growing urgency inside him. Part of him wanted to cross the space between them, confront Sarah, demand answers to the questions now forming in his mind. But he knew he wasn't ready. What if he was right? What if that boy was his son? How could he face that after all these years? The decision not to approach them took hold. It wouldn't be here in a crowded and noisy airport that he would deal with this whirlwind of emotion. Jack took a step back, his eyes still locked on the scene. His quickened breathing made it clear that, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, there was something there that needed to be uncovered. Jack wasn't a man who handled uncertainty well. Throughout his life, he had built his empire on solid information, absolute control, and calculated decisions. Now doubt was eating away at him. Who was that boy? Had Sarah moved on and found someone else? Or was it exactly what he feared? That the boy could be his son, meaning Jack had missed nearly a decade of his life. Instead of confronting Sarah, Jack decided to take a more familiar approach. Control, planning, and investigation. He needed answers, but they had to come discreetly, without Sarah knowing he was watching. He knew that once the truth was out, there would be no turning back. And Jack Morgan never made a move without knowing all the details of a situation first. Hours later, in his office, high up in a skyscraper in the heart of Silver City, Jack looked out at the city below. The nightlights reflected off the glass, creating a contrast between the vibrant world outside and the oppressive silence within his office. He sat in his leather chair, a glass of whiskey beside him. But what would normally have been a typical evening of unwinding after a long day now felt completely different. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah and that boy from his mind. The boy's resemblance to himself, the unmistakable facial features, each detail unsettled him more and more. He took a deep breath, swirling the whiskey in his glass before taking a sip. Jack slowly rose from his chair and walked to his desk. He had resources, power, and now he needed to use them in a way he had never imagined before. He picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number, one he always used when he needed something more delicate. "Max, it's me, Jack. I need a favor." "Discreet, as always," he said, his voice firm and direct. Max Parker was one of the best private investigators in Silver City, known for his absolute discretion and ability to uncover even the most hidden information. For Jack, he was the obvious choice. "Of course, Jack. What do you need?" Max replied on the other end, professional, already accustomed to Jack's requests. "There's a woman I want you to investigate. Her name is Sarah Collins. I saw her today at the airport with a boy. I need to know everything about her over the last 10 years. Where she lives, what she does, and, most importantly, I need to know about the boy who was with her." Jack paused, his voice reflecting the tension he felt. "I need to know if he's my son." There was a brief silence on the other end before Max replied, "Understood. I'll start right away. I'll send you what I find as soon as possible." Jack hung up the phone and sank back into his chair, feeling the weight of what he had just set in motion. The control was now in his hands, but he knew the answers that would come could change his life forever. The silence in his office was interrupted only by the sound of ice melting in his whiskey glass. Jack gazed out at the city, the lights flickering like distant stars. Yet his mind was far away, fixed on the past he had tried to bury, but that now haunted him. Sarah, the boy, Noah. The name echoed in his memory, though he had never really heard it. Something in him knew, instinctively, that the boy was a part of him. Jack Morgan sat in his leather chair, staring into the darkness of the horizon before him. The city of Silver City stretched out like a sea of lights, skyscrapers shimmering against the night sky, reflecting an impersonal and distant modernity. Below, the movement never ceased. Cars crossed the streets, people came and went, too busy with their routines to notice the man who, at the top of one of the city's tallest buildings, felt more lost than ever before. As he waited for the answers Detective Max Parker would bring, Jack found himself trapped in thoughts he had buried long ago. It was rare for something to make him pause and reflect on his past decisions. He had always been the kind of man who preferred to look forward, to the next conquest, to the next billion-dollar contract. But that vision of Sarah and the boy had awakened something he didn't know was still there. The past. He closed his eyes, letting himself be transported to a time when his life was very different. 10 years ago, he and Sarah Collins were together, married for just a few years, still trying to figure out what they wanted for the future. Sarah was full of life, passionate about law, and determined to make a difference in the world. Jack, on the other hand, was just beginning to carve out his path in the tech industry, working long hours, driven by a fierce ambition that he believed at the time was essential for his success. But as his career took shape and his name started gaining notoriety, Jack began to see marriage as something that held him back. He wanted more power, more recognition, more control over the world around him. And slowly, the relationship he and Sarah shared began to deteriorate. Not because of a lack of love, but because Jack believed that to achieve the success he so craved, he needed freedom. Freedom from emotional commitments. The breakup wasn't dramatic. In fact, it was brutally practical. He remembered the look on Sarah's face when, on an ordinary evening, he simply told her that he couldn't continue anymore, that there was something bigger waiting for him, and that the marriage was becoming an obstacle. She remained silent for a long time, just staring at him with a mix of sadness and disbelief. "So this is it?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "After everything we've been through, you're just leaving?" At that moment, Jack believed he was doing what was necessary. He convinced himself it was the right choice, the only choice that made sense for someone with the ambition he had. And so he left. There was no heated argument, just a quiet farewell, almost painful in its simplicity. He never looked back. The divorce was settled quickly, and soon Jack was completely immersed in his career, with his company growing at an impressive speed. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that shortly after his departure, Sarah found out she was pregnant. Now the memory of that time weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had convinced himself that his choice was the right path to success, but the truth he had avoided for so long was beginning to reveal itself. Perhaps he had abandoned something he should never have left behind. What if that boy was really his son? If Noah was the child he never knew existed? Jack rose from his chair, unable to stay still as these thoughts consumed him. He walked to the window, resting his hands on the cold glass, looking out at the city lights he had helped shape with his influence. All the success, all the money, the achievements, what were they worth now, if he had lost something as essential as the chance to be a father? If he had left Sarah to raise a child he never knew? Max Parker had said he would bring answers in a few days, but for Jack, the wait felt endless. Every passing minute forced him to reflect on the choices that had brought him here, and the tension grew with each moment. Jack knew that if Noah was truly his son, things would never be the same again. But what would he do with that truth? He wasn't a man known for regrets, but the possibility that he had missed nearly a decade of his own son's life was beginning to crack that facade. He picked up his phone, scrolling through the contact list until he reached Max's name. He thought about calling, pushing him for answers, but knew it wouldn't help. In the days that followed, Jack tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the same scene at the airport. He wondered how Sarah had managed to move on. She seemed fine, even happy, as she gently stroked Noah's hair, a mother who had clearly built a life far away from him. It bothered him in ways he didn't want to admit. He had left Sarah behind, believing that without him she would be better off, freer, lighter. Now, seeing her, he realized he might have been right. She had rebuilt her life, found stability, and raised their child without ever asking Jack for anything. And what did he have? An empire of concrete and glass, power, money, and success. But deep down, an emptiness he hadn't known existed until that moment he saw Noah for the first time. Jack began to wonder how Sarah would react when she learned that he had discovered the truth. Would she hate him? Probably. He had left her alone at one of the most critical moments in her life. And now, after almost a decade, he was showing up again, shattering the balance she had created. But what terrified him the most was the thought of Noah. What if the boy hated him too? What if, upon learning that the father he never knew was a man who had simply walked away from his mother, Noah never wanted to see him? For the first time in many years, Jack felt fear. Not the kind of fear he knew from negotiating big deals or the risks of his business ventures. This was a deeper, more personal fear. It was the fear of facing the consequences of his actions and, more than anything, the fear of losing something he hadn't even known he had. On the fourth day after the call, Jack's phone rang. It was Max Parker. Jack answered quickly, his heart racing with anticipation. "Jack, I have the information you asked for," Max said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact as always. "Sarah Collins lives in a quiet neighborhood in the suburbs. She works as a civil rights attorney, a successful career it seems. As for the boy, his name is Noah Collins. And yes, he is your son." The confirmation, though expected, hit Jack like a blow. It felt as though the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice faltering slightly. "Absolutely," Max replied. "I did all the checks and analysis. He's 9 years old. He's your son, Jack." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Jack stood frozen, the phone pressed against his ear, as he processed the truth he had already suspected but could no longer deny. Noah was his son, and he had missed 9 years of the boy's life. The confirmation that Noah was indeed his son echoed in Jack Morgan's mind like a distant drum, reverberating through every corner of his consciousness. Even after hanging up the phone, he remained still, staring out the window of his office. The city below seemed small, insignificant. Everything he had built, the wealth, the power, the businesses, felt tiny and meaningless in the face of the reality now confronting him. He had a son, and he had spent 9 years without even knowing of his existence. Jack set the phone down on the table and buried his face in his hands, trying to organize the chaotic thoughts swirling in his mind. Throughout his life, he had prided himself on being a man of quick decisions, an unstoppable strategist who never let emotions or doubts get in the way of moving forward. But now, faced with a truth he never expected, he felt utterly lost. He wondered how Sarah would handle the revelation that he had discovered the truth about Noah. Was it possible she would want to keep him away from the boy's life? She certainly had good reasons to. Jack had left without explanation, walking away from a woman who had, at the time, still believed in their future. And now he was reappearing years later, as if he could simply insert himself into the life she had built on her own. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence in his office, snapping Jack back to the present. He wasn't the type of man to shy away from his responsibilities. And now he knew he had to face this situation. But how? Jack picked up the phone again and called Max Parker. The detective answered almost immediately, as if anticipating further instructions. "Max," Jack began, his voice low and firm, "you gave me the basics, but I need more. I want to know everything about Sarah and Noah's lives, where they live, what they do day to day, and, most importantly, how Noah is doing emotionally. How has he grown up? Who are the people around him? I want a full picture." Max didn't hesitate. "Of course, Jack. I'll send you a detailed report. It'll take a few hours, but you'll have everything you need." Jack nodded, even though he knew Max couldn't see him. "And be discreet, Max. No one can know I'm investigating this. I don't want Sarah to suspect anything." "Understood." After hanging up, Jack was once again enveloped in silence. He stood up and walked over to the glass wall that offered a panoramic view of the city. The lights below sparkled, while he reflected on what to do with the information he was about to receive. Despite the weight pressing down on him, Jack couldn't ignore that he was still a strategist. He had built his empire on careful planning, and this would be no different. He knew that if he wanted to approach Noah, he would need a plan, and Sarah, the mother of his child, would be the centerpiece of that strategy. He needed to understand the world she had built for herself and Noah. It wasn't just curiosity, it was about preparation. Jack knew he couldn't simply show up at Sarah's door, demanding the right to know Noah without first evaluating the situation. He had to know if he would be welcomed, and if not, He would have to find a way to break through the barriers. However, as much as he tried to treat the situation like a business negotiation, a careful analysis before making a decision, Jack couldn't shake the fear that gnawed at him. How would Noah react when he found out who he was? To Noah, he was just a stranger. Worse, he might be seen as the man who had abandoned his mother. These thoughts tormented him. Jack had faced failures before, but none of them felt as personal as this. He wondered once again if it was already too late to fix anything. Hours later, as promised, Max sent the report. A thick stack of documents arrived directly to Jack's office, containing detailed information about Sarah and Noah. He slowly flipped through each page, absorbing the details of the life they had built without him. Sarah Collins, now 38, had become a respected civil rights attorney. She fought for social causes and seemed to have a stable career. There was no sign that she was in a serious relationship, which, in a way, brought Jack some relief. He didn't know how he would feel if another man had taken on the role of father to Noah. Noah Collins, on the other hand, was a healthy and active child. He attended a reputable private school in the suburbs of Silver City, excelled academically, and was well liked by his teachers. He played soccer, had friends, and from what Max had gathered, was a happy and well-adjusted boy. Jack paused for a few minutes, staring at one of the photos Max had included in the report. It was a recent image of Noah, likely taken from a distance at a park. The boy was running, smiling, his hair blowing in the wind. The toy plane he had carried at the airport was in his hand again, as if it was his inseparable companion. Seeing that smile made Jack's heart ache. He wondered how many moments like that he had missed. He turned to the next page, where Max had included a list of daily activities that Sarah and Noah typically followed. It seemed she dropped him off at school every morning and picked him up in the afternoon. Sometimes they would stop at a nearby diner for a snack, and on weekends they visited the local park. The simple yet happy routine stood in stark contrast to the life of luxury and excess that Jack had built for himself. With every new detail he absorbed, Jack felt the weight of his past choices grow heavier. Sarah had managed to create a stable, loving life for Noah without ever asking for help, and Jack had not been a part of it. Now he had to face the consequences. The following days were marked by a growing restlessness. Jack had everything he needed to take action, but uncertainty kept him frozen. He knew he couldn't delay the decision much longer. Sooner or later, he would have to face Sarah, and more importantly, Noah. What haunted him most was the thought of what Sarah would do when she saw him again. Would she forgive him? Would she allow him to be part of their son's life? Jack didn't know. But one thing was certain. He couldn't run anymore. That night, as he gazed out over the city from his apartment window, Jack made his decision. He would go after Sarah. There was no other way. He needed to face the consequences of his choices and perhaps find a way to be part of Noah's life. Still, Jack knew the path ahead would be difficult. He had no illusions that he could simply walk into their lives and be accepted with open arms. There would be resistance and likely deep wounds that he would have to confront. Even so, this was his only chance. Jack picked up the phone once again. This time, he didn't call Max or anyone on his team. Instead, he searched for a number he hadn't dialed in years, Sarah Collins' number. When his fingers finally dialed, the phone rang only twice before going to voicemail. "Sarah, it's me, Jack." He paused, choosing his words carefully. I know this is unexpected, but we need to talk. It's about Noah." Jack Morgan sat in his living room, the phone still in his hand, as the echo of the message he had just left for Sarah Collins faded away. He wasn't sure how she would react, but he knew he could no longer delay the inevitable meeting. Jack had already made his decision. He would be a part of Noah's life, his son's life, and face whatever came next. But as he waited anxiously for a response, he had no idea just how complicated the situation truly was. In the days that followed, Sarah's silence weighed heavily on Jack. He checked his phone constantly, hoping for any sign that she had listened to the message and decided to contact him. But there was nothing. It was understandable. He had left her so long ago, and now he had suddenly resurfaced, bringing up wounds she had likely worked hard to forget. Yet there was something more. A shadow of uncertainty that Jack couldn't quite grasp. Finally, on the third day after the message, Jack's phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and his heart raced. He took a deep breath before answering. "Sarah?" he said, trying to keep his voice steady. On the other end of the line, there was a brief silence, as if she was gathering the strength to speak. "Jack, I got your message," she said, her voice serious, though there was an emotional restraint Jack couldn't quite read. "I don't know what you want from me now, after all this time." Jack hesitated, carefully choosing his words. I know things were left unresolved between us, Sarah, and I know this is sudden. But I found out about Noah. I didn't know. If I had known, I never would have left. I need to see my son. Another pause followed, and Jack felt his chest tighten. Then Sarah sighed deeply. Jack, it's not that simple. I'm not the same person you left behind. And Noah already has a father. Those words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. Noah already has a father. He couldn't immediately process what that meant, but the sudden pain he felt was unmistakable. What do you mean? What are you saying? He asked, his voice suddenly tense. Sarah hesitated again before answering. I got married, Jack. David is the father Noah knows. He raised him. He's been there for him all these years. To Noah, he is his father. Jack fell silent, struggling to absorb what she had just said. He had imagined that Sarah had moved on, but he had never considered the possibility that another man had taken on the role of father to his son. The ground felt like it was falling away beneath him. How could he compete with that? A man who had been there for Noah from the beginning, while Jack, the biological father, hadn't even known the boy existed. This changes everything, Jack murmured, more to himself than to her. I didn't know you had remarried. I didn't expect Noah to have another father figure. I know you didn't, Sarah replied, her voice softer now, almost compassionate. But that's the reality. I moved on, Jack. It wasn't easy, but I built a new life, and David is a part of that life. He's a good man, and he loves Noah like his own son. Jack felt a surge of jealousy and frustration well up inside him, but he tried to stay calm. He couldn't blame Sarah for moving on with her life. After all, he was the one who had left her, and his absence had allowed David to step in and fill the void he had left. I understand, Sarah, Jack said slowly, but I'm Noah's father. I'm not trying to destroy what you've built with David. I want a chance to be part of my son's life. He has the right to know who I am. Sarah didn't respond right away, and Jack could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. This isn't something you can just demand, Jack. I've protected Noah from a lot, and now you show up out of nowhere, wanting to insert yourself into his life? I don't know if that's what's best for him. I'm not demanding anything, Jack replied, trying to keep his composure. But I think Noah deserves to know the truth. I left without knowing he existed. Now that I do, I can't just go on living as if he's not important. Sarah seemed to be weighing his words carefully. Finally, she responded, I need to think. This is complicated, Jack. I can't just tell Noah that the man he believes is his father isn't. And David, he's going to feel betrayed. Jack understood. Of course it would be complicated, but he knew he couldn't give up. I don't expect this to happen overnight. But I need to try, Sarah. Noah has a right to know who I am. And more than anything, I want to know him. Another silence followed, but Jack sensed a shift in Sarah's tone. Perhaps she was more open to considering what he was saying, even if it meant confronting painful truths. I'm not going to promise anything, Sarah finally said, her voice tired. But I'll talk to David. I'll think about what you said. I don't want confusion for Noah, Jack. He's a happy child, and what matters most to me is his well-being. Jack nodded, knowing she couldn't see him. Thank you, Sarah. That's all I'm asking for. I'll let you know when I have an answer, she said, before ending the call. When the line went silent, Jack felt a wave of complex emotions wash over him. The revelation that Sarah had married and that Noah had another man as a father changed everything. Jack wasn't just dealing with Sarah now. He was dealing with David, the man who had raised his son, and the thought that Noah might never accept him as his father filled him with uncertainty. In the days that followed, Jack could hardly focus on work. His mind was constantly preoccupied with waiting for Sarah's response, and the image of Noah beside another man haunted him. How could he enter his son's life without causing turmoil? He knew that if David had been a loving and present figure, Noah would see him as his true father. A few days later, Sarah's message finally arrived. It was short, direct, but loaded with meaning. We can meet. David and I need to talk to you. The meeting was set. Jack knew that from that moment on, the situation would change drastically. He wouldn't just be facing Sarah, but also David, the man who had taken his place, the father Noah knew. Tensions would rise, and Jack would have to face the fact that, despite his desire to reconnect with Noah, he was now part of a family that was already complete without him. The conference room in a discreet cafe in downtown Silver City was spacious, with glass windows that let the morning light flood the room. The atmosphere seemed calm, but Jack Morgan, sitting alone at one of the corner tables, couldn't relax. He watched the movement around him, but his mind was focused solely on the meeting that was about to take place. Sarah had agreed to meet him, but she had one condition. David would be there too. And for Jack, that detail made the meeting even more challenging. He knew that this man, who had taken on the role of father to Noah, would be the biggest obstacle in his path. David wasn't just Sarah's husband, but also the man Noah knew and loved as a father. Jack was about to insert himself into a life that was already fully formed without him. When the cafe door opened, Jack looked up. Sarah entered first, her posture firm, but with a restrained look of someone prepared for a difficult conversation. Behind her came David. He was a tall man with short hair and a serious expression, clearly ready to defend his family. Sarah was the first to approach, and Jack stood up to greet her, feeling the weight of the situation. David stood beside her, his cautious and firm gaze on Jack. There was palpable tension between the two men, something that seemed to fill the space between them like an invisible force. "Jack," Sarah greeted him, her voice calm but with a slight stiffness. "This is David." She nodded toward the man beside her. David extended his hand, keeping a neutral expression, but Jack knew that behind that neutrality lay a mountain of emotion. "David," Jack said, shaking the man's hand. The greeting was brief and formal, with no sign of warmth or friendship. The three of them sat down at the table, and the initial silence was heavy. Jack looked at Sarah and then at David, trying to find the best way to start. He knew he had to be careful, but also firm. He couldn't avoid the confrontation. "Thank you for coming," Jack began, his voice serious but calm. "I know this is hard, and I understand that this situation is complicated, but I needed to talk to you both about Noah." David crossed his arms, leaning forward, his expression tense. "Complicated is an understatement, Jack," he said, his voice controlled. "You showed up out of nowhere after almost a decade, and now you want... what? To be part of Noah's life? You don't even know who he is." David's words hit Jack hard, but he had expected something like this. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I understand this is strange for you both, and I admit I was wrong to leave Sarah, to not be there. But I didn't know Noah existed. If I had known, I would never have left." Sarah, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Jack, I know you didn't know, and I know this is hard for you now, but the reality is that David has been there since Noah was born. He's the father Noah knows." Jack looked directly at Sarah, his eyes searching for some sign of understanding. "I understand that David has been an important figure for Noah. I don't want to destroy that. But I am his biological father, Sarah. I just want a chance to know him." David, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, shifted in his chair and looked directly at Jack. "What do you really want, Jack? Because from where I stand, you're about to mess up the life of a kid who's happy and healthy. Noah doesn't know about you. He doesn't need to know." That last sentence sparked a reaction in Jack. His blood boiled inside, but he held back the explosion of anger that threatened to surface. "With all due respect, David, you don't get to decide that. Noah has the right to know who his father is. You may have formed a family, and I respect that. But I'm his father. I can't just ignore that." David let out a heavy sigh and looked at Sarah, clearly seeking support. "Sarah, this isn't a good idea. What will happen if Noah finds out? He'll be confused. He'll feel betrayed. We can't put that in his head." Sarah looked at Jack with an indecipherable expression. There was a mixture of feelings there: pain, frustration, but also a trace of empathy. "Jack, I understand what you're saying, but Noah is a sensitive child. He grew up believing that David is his father. Telling him the truth now? It could be devastating for him." "I'm not suggesting we throw everything at him at once," Jack replied, trying to find a middle ground. "I want to get to know him. I want to find a way to be part of his life without causing confusion. I know I can't just show up and expect him to accept me, but at least give me the chance to be part of his life." Silence fell over the table once more. Sarah looked at David, who was clearly reluctant, and then back at Jack. There was a lot at stake here, and she knew it. The life she and David had built with Noah was balanced, stable. Jack's presence could disrupt that stability in unpredictable ways. David, still tense, finally spoke again. "And what if he doesn't accept you? What if this only causes pain? Noah is happy the way things are. I'm his father. I've been there from the beginning." Jack felt a pang of pain at those words. He knew David was right. In a way, he had lost the right to be Noah's father when he left Sarah years ago. But that didn't change the fact that Noah was his biological son, and he couldn't ignore that. "I'm not asking to replace anyone, David," Jack replied, his voice lower now, trying to calm the situation. "I just want Noah to know the truth. If he doesn't accept me, I'll respect that. But I have to try." Sarah watched the interaction between the two men, clearly aware that any decision here would have deep consequences. She knew David was fighting to protect the relationship he had with Noah, but she also knew Jack had the right to know his son. She was caught between two worlds, the past and the present, and the choice she made would affect everyone around her. She finally sighed, breaking the silence. "I'll think about it, Jack, but we need to go slowly. I'm not going to put Noah in a situation where he feels lost or betrayed. He's the most important thing in all of this." Jack nodded, relieved to see an opening. "I didn't expect anything else. I want to do this the right way." David, on the other hand, didn't seem satisfied. He got up from his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Sarah, I think we've said enough for today." Sarah agreed and also stood up. "I'll let you know, Jack," she said, with a look that mixed concern and understanding. Jack watched as the two walked away, the weight of what had just happened settling over him. He knew that despite managing to open a door, the battle was just beginning. David would be a constant barrier, and even though Sarah was willing to listen, everything depended on Noah's reaction. Jack wanted to believe that he could find a place in his son's life, but he knew the road ahead would be full of challenges. The days following the cafe meeting were filled with uncertainty for Jack Morgan. He had finally faced Sarah and David, and while he had managed to get an opening, the feeling of being on the outside of his own son's life gnawed at him deeply. Jack wasn't a man accustomed to waiting. His success came from making quick decisions, taking control of situations. But now he was in uncharted territory, powerless over how things would unfold. The memory of the cafe conversation was still fresh in his mind. David's discomfort, Sarah's hesitation, and the fear that Noah might never accept him. Jack knew that even if Sarah was willing to let him in, David would always be an obstacle. He understood why David felt that way. After all, the man had raised Noah as his own. But that didn't lessen Jack's desire to be part of the boy's life. In his apartment, Jack tried to focus on work but failed repeatedly. He sat at his desk, staring at his laptop, but his mind always wandered back to Noah. What was he like? What did he enjoy doing? How would he react when he learned he had a biological father? As Jack mulled over these questions, the phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw Sarah's name. His heart raced. Maybe she had finally made a decision. He answered on the second ring. "Sarah?" he said, his voice tight with anticipation. On the other end, Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "Jack, something's happened. I think you need to see Noah." That simple phrase made Jack spring to his feet, tension coursing through his body. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's fine, physically," Sarah said, but her voice was laden with an emotion Jack couldn't quite identify. "David and I talked about what you said, and we both agreed to wait a bit longer before telling him. But Noah found some things today. He started asking questions. I think the truth is beginning to surface, and I don't know how to handle it." Jack's heart tightened. "What did he find?" "There were some old photos of me, from when we were together," Sarah explained. "He saw them and got confused. He asked why you were in them. I tried to brush it off, but he's smart, Jack. He knows there's something we're not telling him." Jack closed his eyes, trying to process the information. Noah had found clues to his past, and now the questions were starting. The time they thought they had to prepare for the revelation was slipping away faster than they had anticipated. "Sarah," Jack began, trying to stay calm, "this is inevitable. He's going to find out the truth. And the longer we wait, the harder it'll be for him to understand. I need to be there when you tell him." Sarah hesitated, and Jack could hear the conflict in her breathing. "I know, but you have to understand. David's struggling with this. He's trying to protect Noah." "I understand, Sarah, but we can't protect Noah from the truth." "He deserves to know," Jack insisted, feeling the urgency rising inside him. There was silence on the other end, until Sarah finally gave in. "Okay, let's do this. But please, Jack, be gentle. He's just a child." "I will be," Jack promised, feeling a mix of relief and fear. "When do you want me to come?" "This afternoon. Come to our house around 3. We'll do this together," Sarah said, her voice still tense. Jack agreed, and after hanging up, he felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment. The revelation that would forever change Noah's life, and his own. Jack knew he would have to deal with the consequences, but he was ready to face whatever came as long as it meant he could meet his son. When Jack arrived at Sarah's house that afternoon, he parked the car and spent a few moments inside, staring at the house's facade. It was a family home, with a well-kept garden and a swing hanging from the front tree. The kind of stable, happy life Jack wasn't part of. He wondered how Noah would react when he finally understood who Jack was. With a deep breath, Jack stepped out of the car and walked to the door. Before he could ring the bell, the door opened, revealing David, who looked at him with a serious expression. There was a weight in his eyes, but no hostility. Jack knew David was just trying to protect the family he had helped build. "Come in," David said, opening the door fully. Jack stepped inside, and the first thing he noticed was the faint smell of something cooking in the kitchen. The house was cozy, filled with family photos, light wood furniture, and objects that told the story of a family life. Everything seemed so distant from the cold, impersonal reality Jack was used to. Sarah appeared in the living room, her face tense. "He's upstairs in his room. I briefly told him what happened, but he doesn't fully understand yet." "Should I go up now?" Jack asked, nervous but determined. Sarah exchanged a brief look with David, who nodded. "Yes, let's go together," she said. Jack followed Sarah and David up the stairs to Noah's room. His heart pounded in his chest, and he mentally prepared himself for what was to come. When they reached the door, Sarah knocked lightly before opening it. Noah was sitting on the bed, idly playing with the toy airplane Jack had seen him holding at the airport. When he looked up at the adults entering the room, his curious eyes first landed on Sarah, then David, and finally on Jack. There was confusion in his gaze, something the boy couldn't fully process. "Noah," Sarah began, her voice gentle, "this is Jack. He's someone very important, and we want to tell you something about him." Noah looked at Jack with curiosity, but without the recognition Jack had hoped for. To Noah, Jack was still a stranger. "Hi, Noah," Jack said, feeling his voice tremble for the first time in years. I know you don't know me, but I've really wanted to meet you." The boy looked at Jack with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, but he didn't say anything. He turned to Sarah, as if waiting for her to explain what was happening. Sarah took a deep breath. "Noah, Jack, he's your biological father. Jack and we were married before I met David. When you were born, Jack didn't know you existed. But now he does, and he really wants to meet you." The silence that followed that revelation felt endless. Noah looked at David, his father, with total confusion. "But Daddy is David," the boy said, his voice small and hesitant. David, who had remained silent until then, crouched down to Noah's level and put a hand on his shoulder. "I will always be your dad, Noah. I'll always be here for you. But Jack, he's your biological father, and I think it's important for you to get to know him too." Noah looked back at Jack, still processing what was being said. He seemed nervous, confused, and Jack knew it wouldn't be easy for the boy to accept this new reality. But as difficult as it was, this was the turning point Jack had been waiting for. "I know it's a lot for you to take in right now, Noah," Jack said gently. "I just want you to know that I'm here. I want to get to know you and be part of your life if you want. You don't have to decide anything right now, just know that I'm here." Noah looked at Jack for a few more seconds, before turning back to Sarah and David. I need to think," he said, his voice small and vulnerable. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "Of course, sweetheart, we'll take it slow." Jack watched as Noah processed the weight of the revelation, and while he knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, he had finally crossed the first threshold. It would take time, but Jack hoped that eventually Noah would come to accept him. The heavy silence that followed the revelation seemed to echo through the house. Jack, Sarah, and David had left Noah's room, giving the boy the time and space he needed to process what he had just heard. They were now in the living room, but the tension was palpable. Jack felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The truth was finally out. Noah knew he was his biological father, but how would the boy react in the long run? He knew it wouldn't be easy for Noah to accept this new reality. The confusion in the boy's eyes, his attachment to David, everything indicated that the road to building a relationship with his son would be longer and more complicated than Jack had imagined. Sitting on the couch, Jack stared at the floor, absorbed in his own thoughts when Sarah broke the silence. "I know this is a lot for Noah to process right now, Jack," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He's going to need time." "I know," Jack responded without lifting his eyes. I just want him to have the chance to get to know me. I'm not going to push anything, but I hope that, over time, he'll want to have some sort of relationship with me." David, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. There was a certain calmness in his posture now, as if the revelation had eased some of the tension he had been carrying. However, his voice still reflected evident concern. "Jack, I understand that you want this, and I think it's fair that Noah knows who you are. But I also think you need to understand how much this is going to mess with his head." David looked at Sarah, and Jack could see the depth of the bond between them, a partnership built over years of raising Noah together. "I've been Noah's dad from the beginning. He calls me Dad. And now, with you coming into his life, I just worry about how this is going to affect our relationship." Jack lifted his eyes and met David's gaze. He could see the sincerity and concern in the man's face, and for the first time, Jack realized the emotional sacrifice David was making. He was willing to share the role of father with the man who, both biologically and legally, had the right to be there. But Jack knew that this generosity came at a cost. "I'm not here to take your place, David," Jack said, trying to convey sincerity. "I know what you've done for Noah. I know he loves you, and I would never try to replace that. But I am his biological father, and I believe Noah needs to know that part of who he is. I think we can find a way to do this without damaging what you and he have." David took a deep breath, and for a moment the silence returned. He didn't seem convinced, but there was mutual understanding there. Both knew that from now on, everything would be different, and the fragile balance between them would depend on how Noah responded to this new reality. Sarah, who had remained silent while the two men talked, finally spoke up. "What matters most now is what Noah wants. We need to give him the chance to decide how he feels about all of this. He's just a kid, but he's smart. We have to respect his timing." Jack nodded, though he knew the waiting would be hard. He wanted to get to know Noah, to be part of his life. But he recognized that he couldn't rush things. "I agree, I won't push him. I just want him to know I'm here for him when he's ready." The atmosphere was still heavy with tension, but there was at least an unspoken agreement among them. Noah would have the freedom to choose how and when he would approach Jack. The next move was his, and Jack was willing to respect that, no matter how difficult it might be. In the following weeks, Jack spent his days immersed in thoughts and expectations. He tried to return to his work routine, but every email, every meeting, every decision seemed to lose significance in light of what was happening in his personal life. The idea of having a son he barely knew left him in a constant state of unrest. Sarah kept occasional contact, updating Jack on how Noah was handling the situation. The boy, it seemed, was still processing the information. He didn't mention Jack often, but neither did he show immediate signs of rejection. Sarah explained that Noah had many questions, but as expected wasn't yet ready to see Jack again. Then, one Saturday afternoon, about a month after the revelation, Jack received an unexpected call. It was Sarah. "Hi, Jack," she began, her voice a bit lighter than the previous times. "Noah, he wants to see you. He's asked to know more about you." Jack, who had been sitting in his office, froze for a moment. Noah's request was everything he had been waiting for, but the nervousness hit him like a wave. "He wants to see me?" Jack asked, trying to control the anxiety building inside him. "Yes," Sarah replied, with a slight smile in her voice. "He said he wants to learn more about who you are. David and I agreed that if he's ready, we won't stand in the way. But let's take it slow. I think a visit to the park or something like that would be a good start. A neutral setting." "Of course," Jack said quickly, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. "I'll do whatever's best for him. When can we do this? How about tomorrow? In the morning? At the park where he likes to play," Sarah suggested. The next day, Jack arrived at the park early. It was a sunny day, and the trees around swayed gently in the breeze. Children were running everywhere, parents sitting on benches watching and chatting. Jack sat on a bench near the playground trying to calm his nerves. He was about to see Noah in a different setting, without the pressure of the revelation, and he wanted to get everything right. A few minutes later, he spotted Sarah and David arriving with Noah. The boy was holding his mother's hand, but his eyes were fixed on Jack, watching him from afar. Jack felt a knot in his stomach seeing his son's curious gaze. But he also noticed that Noah didn't seem scared or hesitant. There was just curiosity. Sarah and David stopped a few meters away while Noah slowly approached Jack. He was holding his toy airplane in his hands, the same one Jack had seen at the airport, and there was something hesitant about his movements, but not out of fear. Jack smiled lightly, trying to appear as approachable and friendly as possible. "Hey, Noah." The boy looked at him, then down at the airplane in his hands. "Hi." Jack's heart raced at that small interaction. "I heard you like airplanes," he said, trying to start a conversation in a way that felt comfortable for Noah. The boy nodded, still gripping the airplane tightly. "I like making them fly. When I was your age, I liked airplanes too," Jack continued, leaning down slightly to be closer to Noah's height. "I used to dream of being a pilot. I wanted to travel all over the world." Noah seemed to show a bit more interest at that, and his eyes met Jack's. "Do you travel a lot?" "Yeah, I travel quite a bit," Jack answered, smiling. "But when I'm home, I like watching airplanes too. I can tell you some stories if you'd like." Noah hesitated for a moment, glancing over at Sarah and David, who were watching from a distance. But then he turned back to Jack. and with a slightly more open expression said, "Okay, I want to hear." Jack felt a wave of relief and hope. The connection, however small, was starting to form. And in that moment, he knew that the most important decision of his life was being made. He would be there for Noah, no matter how long it took to build that relationship. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he was on the right path. The meeting at the park marked the beginning of something new in Jack Morgan's life. As he sat there, listening to Noah talk about airplanes in school, Jack felt a connection slowly starting to form. Noah was curious but cautious. He still looked at Jack with a certain reserve, as if he were evaluating the man who had just entered his life. For Jack, that was enough. He knew he couldn't force acceptance, but just being there, watching Noah gradually open up, was more than he had hoped for. After an hour of conversation, Sarah and David approached again. The meeting had gone smoother than anyone expected. Noah seemed comfortable, and Jack knew that even small progress was a big step. He waved goodbye to Noah, promising they would see each other again soon. As Jack left the park that afternoon, he felt for the first time that he was on the right path to building something with Noah. However, he also knew the journey was only beginning. There was a long road ahead, filled with emotional challenges. Above all, he knew he had to deal with David, the man Noah had always called Dad. In the following days, Jack kept in regular contact with Sarah. They arranged more park meetups, always cautiously. Noah seemed more comfortable each time he saw Jack, and gradually, their conversations became more natural. Jack shared stories about his travels, talked about his childhood, and listened attentively as Noah described his adventures at school or playing with friends. Despite this progress with Noah, Jack's relationship with David remained tense. David always observed from a distance, his expression shifting between concern and reluctance. He clearly felt threatened by Jack's presence. And Jack knew. David had been Noah's father in every way that mattered, and now Jack was entering a space that David believed was his. One sunny afternoon, about 2 months after the first park visit, Jack received a message from Sarah asking him to come over to their house. She said Noah wanted to talk. Anxious, Jack drove to the house, but upon arrival, he noticed something different in the air. Noah was playing in the backyard, but he seemed more thoughtful than usual. Sarah greeted him with a light smile, but there was a tension hanging over everything. David was in the living room, silent, observing everything from a distance. "Hi, Jack," Sarah said, motioning for him to come inside. "Noah's been thinking a lot about you, and he's been asking questions I think you should answer." Jack's heart raced. He knew that sooner or later, Noah would ask difficult questions. He knew he'd have to explain why he had been absent for so long, and he knew the conversation wouldn't be easy. Noah entered the room shortly after, holding his inseparable toy airplane. He looked at Jack with a more serious expression than usual, and sat down in a chair next to Sarah. "Jack," Noah began, still not calling him Dad, "I want to know why you weren't with me when I was little." Jack felt the weight of the question hit him. He glanced at Sarah, who nodded, encouraging him to be honest. He moved closer to Noah, sitting in front of him, trying to find the right words. "Noah, I know it seems like I left you," Jack started, his voice soft. "But the truth is, when you were born, I didn't know you existed. Your mom and we separated before she knew she was pregnant. And I left to focus on my career, not knowing that you were on the way. If I had known, I would have done everything differently." Noah frowned, trying to process Jack's words. "But why did you leave? Didn't you want to be with Mom?" The pain in Jack's chest intensified. But he knew he had to be truthful, even though the truth was difficult. "At the time, Noah, I thought I needed to focus on my work. I made the wrong choice. I thought success was more important, and that's why I left your mom. But it was never because I didn't love her. I was just too focused on what I thought was the right thing to do." The boy was silent for a few moments, reflecting on what Jack had just said. Jack knew that these answers weren't simple, and they wouldn't heal the pain or confusion Noah felt. But he also knew that for the first time, he was being completely honest with his son, without hiding his mistakes. "Do you want to stay here now?" Noah finally asked. Jack nodded, his emotions stirred by the simple but powerful question. "Yes, Noah. I really want to be part of your life. I know it's complicated, and I know you already have David as your dad, but I also want to get to know you better. I want you to know who I am." Noah looked over at David, who was still sitting across the room, watching everything with a serious but contained expression. "Are you and David going to be my two dads?" Noah's question was innocent but profound. Jack and David's eyes met at that moment. The reality of what they were facing was clear. Two men, both trying to occupy the role of father in the life of the same child. David finally approached. He knelt next to Noah and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Noah, I'll always be your dad, and that's never going to change. But Jack, he's part of your story too, and I think it's fair that you get to know him. We can make this work." There was a sincerity in David's tone that took Jack by surprise. For the first time, Jack realized that despite the tensions, David wasn't trying to push him out of Noah's life. He was trying to protect what he had built, but he also knew that Noah needed this truth in his life. Noah looked at the two men in front of him, and suddenly, a small, hesitant smile formed on his face. "Okay," he said quietly. "I think I can have two dads." Jack felt a wave of relief and emotion, and he knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be moments of tension and conflict in the future. But in that moment, the most important decision had been made. Noah was willing to let him be a part of his life. Sarah, who had been silent until then, smiled softly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "We're a family," she said, her voice thick with emotion. In a complicated way, but still, a family. The following months brought a sense of strange but functional normality. Jack began to see Noah regularly, and little by little their relationship started to solidify. Noah still saw David as his primary father figure, but he was also building something new with Jack, a relationship rooted in truth and acceptance of the past. David and Jack learned to respect their roles in Noah's life, and despite the initial challenges, the two men found a balance. They weren't close friends, but there was a mutual understanding. They both loved the same boy, and they were willing to do whatever was best for him. For Jack, this process of rebuilding brought an unexpected lesson. He had spent his whole life chasing success, believing that happiness lay in power, money, and control. But by reconnecting with Noah, he discovered that true success wasn't in material achievements, but in the human connections he had nearly lost. Each time he saw Noah, whether they were at the park or simply sitting together talking about school, Jack felt a deeper sense of fulfillment than he had ever experienced in his career. The bond that was slowly growing between him and his son became the most meaningful thing in his life. He realized that the moments shared with Noah, the laughter, the questions, the small acts of trust, were what truly mattered. As the months went by, Jack's priorities shifted. He still worked, but his focus was no longer on climbing the corporate ladder or securing the next big deal. Instead, he made time for Noah. He showed up for school events, helped with homework, and even attended weekend soccer games. Every milestone, however small, felt like a victory, not just in his relationship with Noah, but in his own personal growth. David, too, seemed to soften over time. He and Jack developed a respectful co-parenting dynamic, where both were included in important decisions concerning Noah's future. While they never became close, the tension between them eased, replaced by a shared goal of raising Noah with love and support from both sides. Sarah, watching this evolution, felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected. What once seemed like an impossible situation had turned into something that, while not perfect, was functional and healthy for everyone involved. Noah had two fathers who cared for him deeply, and despite the complexities, he was thriving. For Jack, the greatest realization came not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet moment. He realized that what he had gained with Noah, a relationship based on trust, time, and patience, was worth more than any success he had ever achieved in business. In those moments, he understood that his journey with Noah was not just about being a father, but about becoming the man he was always meant to be. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the window of Jack Morgan's office, casting the space in hues of orange and gold. He sat in his leather chair, gazing at the bustling city of Silver City below, where life continued in its relentless pace. For years, this office had been the center of Jack's world, a symbol of all he had achieved. But now, as he looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance, those achievements felt smaller, more remote. Something far more important filled his thoughts. On the shelf next to his desk, a new picture frame stood out amidst the minimalist decor. It was a recent photo taken just the previous weekend. In the picture, Jack stood beside Noah, who was holding his beloved toy airplane, grinning widely. Next to them, Sarah and David smiled as well, something that, months ago, would have seemed unimaginable. In that photo, Jack saw not just a family, but the reflection of everything he had almost lost and, in some way, managed to reclaim. In the months following his reunion with Noah, Jack's life had changed in ways he never expected. He had learned that lost time could not be recovered, but something new could be built. His relationship with Noah was still developing, but there was a growing trust between them. Jack had started attending his son's soccer games, taking him on outings, and most importantly, listening to him. David's acceptance, without a doubt, had been one of the greatest challenges. There had been a natural tension between them, a need to stake out territory. But both men, in their own ways, loved Noah. It was for him that they were willing to find common ground. Jack had come to recognize the crucial role David played in Noah's life, and rather than feeling resentment, he felt respect. Slowly, the two began working together, each taking their place in Noah's world. That night, Jack was getting ready to meet Sarah, David, and Noah for dinner. They had begun doing this from time to time, an effort to ensure that Noah saw the adults in his life as a unit, even if it was an unconventional one. Jack sensed that these evenings were special for Noah, a chance for him to see that despite the changes, his family remained intact, just with new dimensions. As Jack prepared to leave, he found himself reflecting on how much he had changed. He thought about who he had been 10 years earlier, convinced that the only thing that mattered was success. Back then, he had left Sarah without hesitation, believing that prioritizing his career was the right choice. But looking back now, Jack realized just how narrow his worldview had been. What he once saw as success had been an illusion, pulling him away from the things that truly mattered. The greatest lesson Jack had learned wasn't about business or power. It was about the importance of human connections, of family. Sarah, the woman he had left so abruptly, had moved on, rebuilt her life, and along with David raised Noah with love and dedication. And Jack, who had spent years absorbed in his own world, now had a second chance, not to undo the past, but to create something meaningful in the present. At dinner that night, Noah seemed more relaxed than ever in Jack's presence. He talked excitedly about a school project, describing in detail how he and his friends had built a giant paper airplane for a science contest. Jack listened attentively, impressed by his son's intelligence and passion. Sarah and David smiled as Noah spoke, clearly proud. "And guess what happened?" Noah continued, his eyes shining with excitement. "Our plane flew the farthest. We won first place." Jack grinned broadly. "I knew you'd win. I bet all your knowledge about planes helped a lot." Noah nodded enthusiastically, laughing. "I think it did. Will you help me with the next project?" "Of course I will. I'll be there for whatever you need," Jack replied, feeling a surge of joy seeing the trust in Noah's eyes. Throughout the dinner, Jack noticed how the barriers that once seemed insurmountable were gradually disappearing. Noah was starting to see him as a part of his life, something Jack had feared might never happen. He looked at Sarah, who was chatting animatedly with David about work, and felt a quiet gratitude. She had allowed him back into their lives, even when it meant facing the past and the pain he had caused. Jack knew that his relationship with Noah, Sarah, and David would never be conventional. He would never have the traditional role of a father, and he accepted that. What mattered was that he was present, and that together, they had found a way to function as a family. After dinner, Jack and Noah went out to the backyard. The night sky was clear, and the stars sparkled like tiny points of light in the vast expanse. Noah ran ahead, clutching his toy airplane, while Jack watched with a soft smile. "Let's make the plane fly," Noah said, lifting the toy toward the sky. Jack knelt down to Noah's level. "Let's do it." As Noah launched the toy airplane into the air, Jack watched him run, his heart swelling with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew that the path leading to this moment had been full of difficulties and regrets, but now everything seemed to make sense. For Jack, the greatest lesson of his life wasn't learned in boardrooms or through billion-dollar deals. It was here, in the simple act of throwing a toy airplane into the air with his son, of being part of a family he had nearly lost. Noah ran back to him, smiling widely. "Do you think I can be a pilot one day?" Jack chuckled and tousled Noah's hair. "I'm sure you can be anything you want, Noah. And I'll be here to help you, always." Noah looked at Jack for a moment, as if pondering something important. Then suddenly he leaned in and hugged him. It was an unexpected gesture, but one filled with meaning. Jack hugged him back, feeling the warmth of the moment, and knew that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Jack's journey was far from perfect, but he had learned that true success wasn't in material wealth or business triumphs. It was in the bonds we form with the people we love. And as he watched Noah run through the yard again, Jack knew that at last he was in the right place, at peace with his past, present for the future, and above all, part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. Thanks for following along with this exciting story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We have heartwarming new stories almost every day, And you can check out other amazing ones by clicking the links popping up on your screen now. See you next time.